Wow, we're recording. Elaine and I already started talking like immediately as soon as we got on Riverside. We were just trashing this movie. This is Melanie. I'm Melanie, one of the co-hosts of Red Power Hour. It's just me and Elena today. This is a bonus episode for our patrons. Thank you so much for your Patreon donations. If you know anyone else who's interested, please encourage them to join our Patreon, again, for as little as $1 a month. But yeah, we are kind of following suit with what we've done with prior bonus content. And we're going to do kind of like a indigenous left analysis of pop culture phenomena, I guess is the plural phenomenon. But today, we're going to be talking about Avatar. It's like a damn movie. I mean, like, we immediately started trashing it. As we got on. We're gunning, we're ready. And part of the reason why we wanted to talk about Avatar is because there's a new one coming out later this year. And Elena, you were saying this is like there's 4 of them, which is like a travesty.
There's four of them. So the first one, which was just Avatar, which came out in 2009, was just the first. The second one is called The Way of Water. So instead of dances with aliens, it's going to be dances with mermaids, or yeah. I mean, this movie is. I just, oh God. When it first came out in 2009, I remember being really blown away by the special
Everyone
effects,
was. There was
the
so much hype
CGI,
about it.
and it was so beautiful. I mean, the colors, like it was almost overwhelming, and it was like an acid trip. Full disclosure, like I thought it was like an acid trip. It's like, wow, this is so cool. And then I did a little bit of sort of spot analysis and thinking, oh yeah, this is obviously very much like Dances with Wolves, very much like Pocahontas, Last of the Mohicans, where the white guy comes in and saves everybody, and that's nothing new. But watching it again in preparation for this episode, and also in preparation for the next ones coming out, I was actually so grossed out by so much in that film, and the amalgamation of like images and the so there's it's you can pretty much, you're safe saying that it is about indigenous people, and it's taken from um, indigenous communities on this planet, yes. But which ones and where do they come in and how do they mix together? And there's Australian Aboriginal people, and there's Amazon
Yep.
images, and
There's
there's
like Lakota, like
African.
Plains people, and there's African people. It's just like a hodgepodge. It's really, even the accents of the main characters, the Navi, the people who are the voices for the Navi characters are just like this weird, like global tribe of like an indigenous person. It's so disturbing. It's so
It
racist.
really, it really, it's very, very racist, very disturbing, and there's a lot of other stuff in there that we'll dive into. There's the, um, you know, the, I I don't even know what to say. Like the heterosexism in this is, and it's very much like Pocahontas, very much like Last of the Mohicans. Um, and Dance of Wolves, where you have to have heterosexual love in order to humanize these people. And once the white man is accepted into the tribe by the love of a woman, then
The chief's daughter.
right, and who happens to be, and I didn't even realize this in 2009. That's actually Wes Studi,
I know. I
which
was like shut. I
even
was like, oh my God, that's Uncle Wes's voice.
I was like, "Oh, yuck, that's scary." Um, but the other thing that was sort of unbelievable is literally like Dances with Wolves. You have this military, and you have, of course, the military is all evil and it's all bad, at which they are. But like there's there's this one redemptive character, um, rides to the fort that's deserted. Oh wait, that's it. Dances with Wolves. Sorry. Goes into the Navi world, falls in love with a Navi princess,
Oh,
and
she
becomes,
she is a princess.
yeah, she is a princess, just like Pocahontas. Yeah, I mean, it's got shades of so much in there that we need to dig deep. And um, sort of jumping off of the last pop culture episode that we did, which we talked about Dune, and the Orientalism, that's coded into Dune is also coded heavily into Avatar. And except, instead of Orientalism, it's indigenism, but it's like such a mishmash, as Melanie said, such a mishmash of tribes that you just, you're not even sure what you're looking at or what you're relating to. And then the I think, as an older person now, and the fact that we've gone through so many, well, 2 decades of special effects, they're not so dazzling anymore. Now they're like, kind of, it's like sugar overload. It's like too much candy.
I felt like a video game. It felt like if you had you were like in a virtual reality kind of thing, and maybe that's what it was meant to be like. And that's interesting because the first thing I had not, okay, let's backtrack for a second. This is very disorganized, but who cares? We're just freestyling it here. So I watched this in the theater like the day it came out. My sister's then boyfriend, who is now my brother-in-law, he was really excited about the special effects because there's, I don't remember this at all. This was 2009, what, 14 years? Wait, I can't count. It was 13 years ago, right? That's 13 years
Yeah.
ago. Um, and he got us, my entire family, tickets to go see it because we were all spending the holiday together. I don't remember why we were all together, but we all went to go see it in the theater. And I remember being dazzled also by the special effects, and it was packed. And then pretty much soon thereafter, completely forgot the movie existed. And so I watched it again last night for the first time since 2009. I'm a very different person than I was in 2009. And I was appalled. I was appalled
Yep.
at the things that I was watching in this movie. First of all, I'm angry that I had to pay $4 to rent that fucker. I couldn't find it anywhere for free, and I was like, I want my $4 back. I rented it on Apple TV and then like lost 3 hours of my life last night watching this movie. But you know what? This is what I do. This is what we do for the people. This is what we sacrifice for the people to bring you Red Power Hour. But so this is what I thought I wanted to share that because I'm seeing it from in like a completely new way, like you said, Elena, from the first
Mhm.
time that you saw it. And so I actually didn't remember anything. I mean, everyone knows about like the famous blue cat people thing. And like, I don't know, just the general like the trippy vibe, like the acid trip kind of vibe. But I had actually forgotten the story. I forgot the characters. I forgot the plot. And so I was kind of seeing it again but kind of for the first time. And the first thing that struck me, because the opening is Jake Sully is the main character. He's the white savior, the protagonist of the story. You find out that his twin brother has died back on Earth, I think. And Earth is like dying or something. And so, because he shares his brother's DNA, he gets recruited by this private security corporation, I'm assuming, that's been hired by an extractive corporation on the planet Pandora because they're mining for a certain kind of resource. He's been recruited by them to replace his brother because they share DNA. And so you find out really early, like 10 minutes easily into this long ass movie, that that Jake is going to be paired with a Navi, like an indigenous person. And but what was, I mean, it's disturbing that they're like in tanks or whatever, that the actual Navi have been grown by scientists, like I'm assuming, who work for the corporation in these tanks. What I actually was more disturbed by was the fact that they were literally wearing indigenous skins. Like
Yeah.
that's actually what they're doing. Like Jake Sully was recruited, or his brother was recruited and then him, to literally put on indigenous skins to inhabit the indigenous body I mean, of course, in order to do the work of like colonialism, but it just immediately made me think of Get Out. Like, even though, right, the focus of that is about like anti-blackness and white supremacy, this film was like much more about like, I don't know, right? You wear like white people, like settlers, essentially wearing indigenous skins and
Yeah.
like playing Indian, but they're not just playing Indian, they're like literally inhabiting Indian, like the indigenous consciousness. They look
Yeah.
like indigenous people so that they can like infiltrate indigenous society. And that is just like so creepy. It's so incredibly creepy. And then these Navi people apparently know that this Jake Sully guy is actually just some like dumb white dude, but they accept him anyway in his indigenous form in their community. And I'm like, that's dumb. Like that would not happen. At least Kevin Costner wasn't like, I mean, he was playing Indian in Dances with Wolves, but James Cameron, who is the writer and the director of Avatar, he took it to a whole new level. He's like, no, he's not just a white guy anymore, you know, who becomes native. He gets to wear the skin of native people and he becomes fully native. He goes native. But there's something about that that is very, it's like clearly James Cameron wishes he was indigenous. And the thing is that this is like a touchstone of kind of like settler ontology or like settler identity. There's right is like the desire to be indigenous because by definition a settler is alienated from the land because the land is stolen, right? The land, they're not actually from that place. Only someone who is indigenous is from this place and is recognized by the place, by the land itself, as having that relationship, that original relationship. And so by definition settlers are alienated from themselves because they're alienated from the land. And so what better way than to like play out the fantasy of belonging for James Cameron, like, you know, like the quintessential
Yeah.
white dude, power playing white dude in Hollywood, than to fantasize about being literally being able to don indigenous bodies and skins in order to make his way through the world. And that is so disgusting.
Yeah. And Cameron actually says and I was reading some of the interviews after that he had after the movie came out, and it was embraced by a number of indigenous communities um, as sort of reflecting their values and their struggles with extractive industries. And Cameron actually admits that um, that the the protagonist has to be a white man because he's a white man, and that he doesn't say it in this way, but if you read between the lines in this interview, he says that he's working out his own settler guilt, his own white guilt through this character, and so he actually is Jake Sully, and the
I knew
the
it.
Oh yeah. And the other thing that immediately disturbed me, which I didn't really focus on the first time I saw it in 2009, was that the Marine, so this Ura Marine who's been injured in some um, unspoken battle somewhere, has been made into a paraplegic. And so he trades his body in for this laboratory grown indigenous body, which is obviously much better than his because it's fully capable. It is not differently abled, and he likes this so much that you can see him struggling when he has to return back to who he is in this little pod where his own body lays when he embodies the avatar, and it just this idea that you can trade um, a destroyed planet and a destroyed body for something better is just to me what we talk about a lot in the Red Deal, right? It's decolonization or extinction because they're not only destroying their they're destroying the earth, and then they're coming to Pandora to extract this mineral, which is actually really like almost nursery school. It's called unobtainium.
Dumb.
Like,
I was like, did they just say unobtainium? It's just like just the most basic shit.
so it's settler nostalgia for it's this idea that um, you can leave your homeland, your home planet, and you can not only get what you need by pillaging and plundering another society, another land, another planet, but you can trade in not only your planet, you can trade in your body and get a new one, a better one, and it's just it's horrific. Ugh.
So yeah, it's like that's a good point, Elena. It's kind of like a dual type of like resource colonization with the unobtainium, which is why they destroy. So they completely blow up the home of the Navi. It's this tree. I forgot. It's a huge tree, and but at the same time, they're also like harvesting their bodies, essentially for. So there's like okay, right. So the Sigourney Weaver, yeah, her character Grace. We'll talk about Grace in a second, but Grace gets shot some like maybe like 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the movie, and Jake is trying to save her, and so he brings her to the holy, the most sacred site. I think Awa seems like Mother Earth or like
Yeah,
the Great Spirit or something like that is probably it's the metaphor for that or the equivalent in Pandora and James Cameron's dumb interpretation of indigenous people and indigenous spirituality. And so he brings Grace to the center where like Awa's power is most intense to try to like heal her. And then there's this like creepy moment where they're all like chanting together, the entire village.
and they're
No, mind you that their
swaying.
entire home has just been blown up, but no, let's save the
Yeah.
white woman. Let's save the white
Mhm.
anthropologist. Let's put all of our energy into that, even though our entire home has just been destroyed in our lives. People have died. Our chief is dead. But they're doing this, and she ends up not living. Sorry, spoiler alert or whatever. I guess everyone's probably seen Avatar, but she ends up not living or whatever. But God, why did I start talking about this? We were talking resource colonialism, harvesting bodies. I'll
Say
remember.
they stop literally everything in the middle of a war,
Yep,
and
to save her.
Jake grabs her, and they go to the Tree of Souls.
That's what it's called,
So
the Tree
there's
of Souls.
yeah, there's like two trees. One of them is like one of them is like the Tree of Life. They actually have two trees. Yeah, Tree of Life, and the other is the Tree of Souls. And so I just watched this last weekend, and now I can't remember. Why am I okay?
Because you
I'm
just
lost too.
want to forget. Like,
You
it's like
just
not a
want to
movie that
forget.
you really want to keep in your mind because it's disturbing.
Yeah, and the whole particularly for indigenous people, the role of Grace, and the other character who is like I can't even think of what his name is, but they're anthropologists,
Oh,
and
that's right.
their role is to assist the extractive corporation in finding a way. But you knew this was never going to happen. But in finding a way to get the Navi to give up the land. And so all of their studying and all of their avatar creating um, is basically just to infiltrate the communities and find a way to make them give up their land, which that for indigenous people goes all the way back to first colonization on Turtle Island, but also all the way through the 60s and 70s with the American Indian movement and all that, this idea of infiltration and being able to turn indigenous communities um, to create enough turmoil and internal conflict so that they will just give up their land. And the anthropologists, you're supposed to see them. You're supposed to see Grace as a good character and someone who's trying to save the Navi. But literally, what she's doing is she's taking, like Melanie said, she's becoming one of them in order to get them to turn over their land because that's the only way that she sees that they can survive.
Yeah, it's okay. I want to talk more about Grace. I think I just remembered what I was trying to say first, though, which relates and then segue into Grace as an anthropologist and what that means. So, what you were saying, Elena, about the harvesting, let's say the harvesting of indigenous bodies, the Navi bodies, uh, which Grace is doing. Grace is a scientist. She's a botanist by training, but she's also very interested in like it's almost like the electromagnetic or whatever the network they call it. You know, it's like the trippy shit that you see throughout the movie, the way that all living things are connected or whatever. And she's interested in like understanding that scientifically. And so Grace is there to study these people, like all anthropologists. But in the moment where they're trying to save her, using the energy field essentially, and they're all connected and they're swaying back and forth to try to save Grace, what's happening in that moment is the same thing that's happening when the scientists themselves are, on behalf of the corporation, are growing the bodies of these Navi, the avatars themselves, that Grace and Jake and the other guy, I forgot his name, inhabit, in order to infiltrate the people. But it's also the same thing that's happening with the corporation trying to extract minerals from the land. Is that Reese? There, there's only one. You know what's interesting about this movie is that the way James Cameron wrote it is that he's like, okay, so I'm going to talk about colonization, but the primary way I'm going to talk about it is resource colonization or resource colonialism, which is one of the types of colonialism that Native people have experienced historically, especially in Turtle Island. Right. So the going in, the kind of the extraction of coal, the displacement of indigenous people, state violence, the incarceration of indigenous people who resist, right? That kind of extraction of value. That's how capitalism works, right? You extract value, you exploit land, you exploit life, you exploit bodies, and out of the extraction of that and the exploitation of that, you're able to create value and profit for the ruling class, for example. So that's very much going on in this movie. But it's not just the land that's being exploited for unobtainium, which is apparently some sort of like high value mineral. You don't really find out what they need it for or where they're going to use it, but it's the bodies themselves of the Navi that are being exploited as well. The value is being extracted from those bodies. And so even as Grace is like dying or whatever, and they're trying to save her, there's like this whole commentary, I think, about like the value of her life compared to the value of Navi life. And even in that moment, she and Jake, who's trying to save her, is still extracting value from the Navi at the same time that they're trying to save them. But it's like the impulse of settlers to constantly want to exploit and extract value because resource colonialism, by definition, is an extractive relationship. And it's an extractive and an exploitative relationship. Now, that being said, about resource colonialism, there's another type of colonialism that is also happening in the movie, but James Cameron doesn't understand it very well. It's settler colonialism. And what's interesting though is that these people are not interested in settling Pandora, from what I can tell. They pretty much have only created an outpost on this planet in order to obtain unobtainium, right? And so, which is, okay, sorry, I just had to say that it's so dumb. But at the same time, all of the tropes that James Cameron is using, there are literally replica scenes, but in like his dumb, like virtual reality Pandora mind of Dances with Wolves, right? The movie that we've done a review of this. Everyone knows what Dances with Wolves is. And what was happening in Dances with Wolves wasn't resource colonialism. That was settler colonialism. That was the US military acting as the foot soldiers of empire building, the expansion, the taking of land, and the consolidation of indigenous land into the growing empire known as the United States of America. And so it's an interesting combination in the mind of this white man, this white American man, where he's like, well, I'm going to look to like European colonialism and European imperialism in places like Africa or Asia or Latin America, where it was about going in and uh, either killing or turning indigenous people, making them submit to imperial control in order to gain access to rubber in Brazil or a different kind of resource that's in a different type of place, in what were formerly British imperial places, or Dutch imperial places. But what's also going on in the movie is like a type of US because he's a white dude from America, James Cameron is. He's like also doing this kind of settler move in a lot of different ways too, but he's like very confused about like what's going on. It'll be interesting to see in the subsequent movies if there's like settlement happening on Pandora, or if there's like this creepy intermarriage, or like this like way in which the Navi and human beings, whom I'm assuming are going to be mostly white, start to like blend with each other, and they end up kind of creating this like one tribe, or like this because I have a feeling that's probably where he's headed with the whole thing. But so I just wanted to talk about that. There are two different types of colonialism going on in this movie, and he seems very unconscious of like the settler impulses. He seems very overtly conscious about like the resource colonialism impulses that he's trying to write into the plot of the film.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. In the other scene, so we have these anthropologists, and Grace Wright is a botanist, and she is supposedly trying to study the Navi to figure out how their culture works. That's what anthropologists do, as a way of using that information to um, remove them from their land and enable this corporation to come in and extract the unobtainium. And there's a scene where she's in the building with the head of the extractive company, and she's talking about um, how everything is interconnected, and she throws in scientific terms like neural networks and neurons, as if somehow you can, if you use a scientific approach to describe how the Navi feel about their land, somehow it becomes more relevant. And um, as indigenous people who, we have a lot of traditional ecological knowledge of our own, but it doesn't necessarily um, it doesn't necessarily translate into the scientific framework that Western culture needs in order for it to be relevant and important. And Grace is trying to do that in this scene. She's trying to make traditional ecological knowledge somehow important enough so that they will understand that they shouldn't destroy Pandora to obtain the unobtainium. But in doing that, in like putting it out there and trying to explain it in a Western model, a taxonomic model of Western science, it completely obliterates agency. So the indigenous communities have no agency of their own. They are just pawns of this settler extractive um, corporation, and everything that they live for, that they know, that they hold dear in their culture, has to be translated into Western science in order for it to become real. And that's, I think, the problem that you have with all of these films, from Pocahontas to Last Mohicans, Dances with Wolves, all of them, is that you remove the agency from the indigenous people, and it becomes a story told by a white man about white men, and um, and uses indigenous exoticizes indigenous people as background, and as the pretty colors and the nice flying things that you attach your braid to. Or they fly, and they have horses that you both of them you attach your braid to, which didn't bother me in the first one. I thought it was kind of cool, and now I'm like, yeah, I don't like that. Like, we know hair is important um in indigenous cultures, but it seemed so trite and just kind of gross that you just attached yourself to these horse-like creatures, and then these winged creatures, and that automatically meant that you were bonded in some way, and that just made me sick.